A hastily thrown together human experiment. That's what experts warned, and they were right. Clayton Lockett wasn't supposed to make headlines, he was supposed to disappear. Another name crossed off the list. Instead, his execution exploded into chaos. Brutal, graphic, unforgettable. It shook the justice system and shut down Oklahoma's chamber for years. Oklahoma State Penitentiary. 24 hours before it all went wrong. Clayton Lockett refused dinner at 6 that night, just like breakfast and lunch before it. He'd face what came next on an empty stomach, his final 24 hours. Because there was nothing left to stop it. No more appeals, no motions, no stays. Just days earlier, there'd been a flicker of hope. The state Supreme Court hit pause, questioning Oklahoma's refusal to disclose the chemicals they plan to use. But that hope was crushed under political pressure as fast as it appeared. The stay was lifted. His attorneys had warned the chemicals were secret, unverified, possibly even illegal. But the state wouldn't disclose a thing, and the courts said they didn't have to. The plan was locked in. An execution using a new, untested 3-drug cocktail, a protocol never tried in this combination or dosage. A human being as a guinea pig. They knew the risks, they just didn't know how bad it would get. He got in his bed early, but sleep didn't come easy. Not just because of what awaited him, but because of H-Unit protocol. Guards checked his cell every 30 minutes, all night. Their logs show nothing unusual. No outbursts, no talking, just silence. Remarkable for him. Long before sunrise, the steel door of his cell creaked open. A transfer was scheduled. Destination? The prison infirmary. One last medical checkup, even an x-ray. Not standard, but specific to him. Because Lockett had a long history of violence and outbursts in prison. In recent weeks, he'd grown erratic, threatening to resist the process itself. The Department of Corrections was ready. That same morning, they brought in CERT, the Corrections Emergency Response Team, armed, trained for conflict, and they'd need them. Lockett wouldn't move, wouldn't show his face. He was hiding under a blanket, ignoring every command. Lockett wasn't new to defiance or to danger. Long before he ever reached the row, violence followed him like a shadow. He grew up bouncing between the streets and juvenile custody. His crimes escalated fast. Break-ins, armed robberies, assaults. Violence was his habit. And in 1999, that violence crossed a point of no return. A brutal home invasion in Perry, Oklahoma. 19-year-old Stephanie Nyman refused to hand over the keys to her pickup. Lockett answered with cruelty. He beat her, bound her, shot her. And while she was still breathing, still conscious, he had her buried in a shallow grave. She never made it out.
So I told Sean, I said, homegirl gonna tell dude, I said, we're gonna have to kill her. They was like, all right. So they said, well, who gonna kill her? I said, I'll kill her. They was like, all right. So Sean said he'd dig the hole.
A crime so cold, so calculated, the jury returned death without hesitation. Back inside OSP, the response team backed off briefly, gave him space, a chance to cool down. But at 5:30, when ordered to drop the blanket and approach the door, Lockett stayed put. No response, no compliance. 15 minutes later, they'd had enough. CERT moved in. He tried to jam the door, but it didn't hold. They forced it open. He resisted, struggled, still refused to follow commands. A taser ended the standoff. He went down. Once they had him restrained, they noticed blood. Fresh cuts along his arms, a lot of them. With no time to lose, they loaded him into a gurney and rushed him to the infirmary. He'd used a razor blade, snapped from a disposable, found during a cell sweep after he was gone. Just like you found my channel. Hit subscribe now, and the next story will find you. After staff treated the cuts and completed the delayed pre-execution procedures, Lockett was brought back to his cell. Breakfast waited, but he refused again. By now, he hadn't eaten in over 24 hours, still holding his line from the day before, and food wasn't the only thing he turned down. That morning, his attorneys arrived, ready for a final meeting, a last conversation, or just goodbye. He declined. No legal visit, no family, no clergy. Instead, he stayed alone in his cell under heightened observation. Officers checked on him every 15 minutes, and medical staff periodically inspected his bandages to ensure the cuts weren't bleeding again. He looked calm, or maybe just worn out. Nothing unusual was reported, not yet. The quiet didn't last. By early afternoon, pressure was boiling. Outside the prison gates, news trucks crowded the roads into McAllister. Satellite dishes bloomed like metal flowers. Reporters paced. Cameras pointed. The headline? An untested protocol, a human subject. Live, with witnesses watching, and even the state sounded unsure. They warned the execution may take longer than normal. Not exactly comforting, and this wasn't a one-off. Lockett wasn't the only man scheduled that night. Back-to-back executions, a first for Oklahoma in decades. After Lockett, Charles Warner was set to follow. Same chemicals, same night. Guards stepped into Lockett's cell. This time, he didn't fight. They changed him into clean prison-issued clothes, checked his restraints, and escorted him to the holding cell steps from the execution chamber. At the same time, across the hall, staff retrieved the chemicals from cold storage. They were brought into the executioner's station. Inside, a paramedic and 3 executioners began prepping IV lines and loading syringes. Lockett entered the execution chamber, flanked by guards. Warden Anita Trammell at his side. He didn't resist as they strapped him down. Just before 5:30, the search for a vein began. A paramedic and the prison doctor circled both of his arms. No luck. They moved lower, legs, feet, even his neck. Still nothing. Minutes passed. Needles in, needles out. A crisis no one planned for, on top of an execution already under fire. Nearly 20 minutes later, they still hadn't secured a vein, but witnesses were being let in. Media, lawyers, officials, the victim's family. By 5:55, the viewing room was full. Curtains still closed, but the stage was set. As far as the public could tell, everything was going according to plan, but it wasn't. The curtains rose, 18 minutes late. It had taken 50 minutes to find a vein. The team finally succeeded. An IV line pushed into Lockett's right groin. You can imagine better places for a needle. And this was just the start. The worst was still ahead. The call came in from the governor's office. Proceed. Warden Trammell asked Lockett if he had any last words. He declined. The execution officially began. 100 milligrams of midazolam, the sedative, entered the IV line. A stopwatch was started to track the effect. 5 minutes later, a check for consciousness. Lockett was blinking, licking his lips, still awake. The doctor stepped in, confirmed it. Something was wrong. It took too long. 7 minutes into the execution, the doctor checked again. He declared him unconscious. The second chemical followed, a paralytic agent. Then came the third, meant to stop the heart. But only part of the dose made it in, because within seconds of that third one, everything went wrong. Lockett began to move. He twitched, bucked, made noise. "Something's wrong," he said. Witnesses saw him writhing on the gurney, tried to speak, even lifted his head. "Man," he groaned.
One of the things he said was something's wrong. He said man at one point. He kept trying to raise up.
What we saw was somebody coming back to consciousness, one of his attorneys later said. The medic rushed to check the IV. The needle had been misplaced. The chemicals had leaked into surrounding tissue instead of entering his bloodstream. Lockett wasn't sedated. The execution was failing. The mic cut out. The blinds came down. The warden called it off. Execution officially halted, but Lockett was still alive. Behind the blinds, panic set in. They tried again, but he couldn't hit a vein. He had been given a partial dose, not enough to kill him, but there wasn't enough left to try again. With no plan, no protocol, and no idea what came next, the team hooked up a heart monitor. His pulse was slowing, each minute weaker. Witnesses were escorted out. The chamber emptied. The medical team hovered by the gurney, watching the monitors. Lockett was critically injured, wasn't moving, wasn't speaking. They didn't know what to do next. But then, one final beep. Flatline. At 7:06 p.m., Clayton Lockett was pronounced dead. Massive heart attack. 43 minutes after the first injection. His attorney later said it plainly. Exactly what we were worried about happened. He died in pain. The second execution scheduled that night officially postponed. Oklahoma's director of corrections called for a full moratorium. No more executions, not until they figured out what went wrong. Did he suffer too much or not enough? Drop your verdict in the comments, and don't torture me by leaving without subscribing. See you in the next one.